Hey, let's do a complete ball python care guide. A relatively complete ball python care guide. Welcome to the green room. Hey everybody, welcome to the green room. I'm Bob Bledsoe. This is Molly Malone. She's a Ultramel het pied ball python who is almost 4 months old. Ultramel and pied are recessive genes, and in this channel we're going to talk about genetics, but not today. This is a channel that's all about ball pythons, care, breeding, behavior, handling, genetics, all that kind of stuff. But today we're going to do a care guide because my first two videos on this channel, I did two completely different enclosure type videos, and I realized I need to just do a care guide. We need to have that because I want to have something to refer people to when they ask me questions for new owners. There's a lot of care guides online, and I encourage you to look at a bunch of different ones because you're going to hear some of the same things from everybody, and you're going to hear some different things from everybody. There's a lot of different opinions about how ball pythons can be kept, and the nice thing is they can be kept in several different ways. So hearing from different people, getting care guides from different people is a really good thing because you can sort of decide how you want to care for your ball python based on all the information that you get. So again, I'm Bob Bledsoe. This is Molly Malone. Behind the camera is my brother Kent. Kent, this is a baby snake. Do you want to maybe try and touch her? No. You didn't see the way she was looking at me just now. It's a hard pass. Okay. So, ball python. In England, they call it a royal python because the English think they are better than us. That's right, England. Gauntlet dropped. So, you know, I mentioned get a lot of information from different people. Here's one place, and I don't want to get negative feedback from the pet store people, but one place I would suggest not maybe taking a lot of stock in is a pet store employee. Let's say a high school kid walks into a pet store and applies and sits down for the interview. Here's usually what's going to happen. The manager is going to go, are you able to lift 25 pounds? Yeah. Okay, you're hired. I think we'll put you in the reptile department. Reptiles, that's like snakes and lizards and stuff? Yeah. Do you know the difference between a snake and a lizard? Legs? You know what? You just made shift supervisor. You know, pet stores they don't necessarily have the most knowledgeable people. Maybe that person's great with dogs and cats, but doesn't quite know what they're talking about with reptiles. And I say that just because I see all these posts on the Facebook groups and everything with people that have just come from the pet store with their brand new setup that the pet store employee told them to get, and it's all wrong. Everything about it is wrong. So get your advice from people that are doing videos like this, maybe people on Facebook that are chiming in and saying, hey, I've owned ball pythons for a long time, or I have a bunch and I know what to do, and here's what I do. And you get a bunch of that different advice, put it together, and you can get a pretty good setup. So let's talk about this. Enclosure, heat, humidity, substrate, food, water, security. Food, water, security. Yeah. So those are the subjects. From the ball python's point of view, from Molly Malone's point of view, the number one thing for her is security. That's really all she cares about. By the way, for 4 months old, such a non-defensive, I want to say sweet and nice, but everything is sweet and nice. It's just whether they're defensive or not. Such a non-defensive, lovely little animal. She's never struck, always just curious. She's great. All right, your enclosures. You have a couple of choices. You can go with a plastic tub. You can go with a glass enclosure, whether it's an open front or a tank, or you can go with a PVC enclosure, which is fantastic. PVC is PVC on the top, sides, and back, and then glass or plexiglass on the front, whatever they end up using, some clear material. So those are basically your choices. And they're all fine. They all work fine. You're going to find a big debate on glass versus tubs and things like that. There's pros and cons to all of them, and that could be a whole video in itself. But just know this, if you've got a glass enclosure, you're probably going to have to cover the screen top with foil tape. I don't use foil tape because I don't need it. I've got a pretty humid place already, so just with some clear plastic on the top, it works fine for me. Tubs are fantastic too. They're probably better in controlling heat and humidity and really good for your snake feeling secure, but they're not as pretty as that. So take your pick. Tub sizes. Your tub size should be, your snake should not be longer than one side plus one end of your tub. If it's longer than that, then you need to upgrade. That's the minimum size for a tub or a tank, or enclosure is what I should say, not just tub. They can be quite a bit bigger though, and I just did a video on setting up a tub and I talked about this. They can be quite a bit bigger as long as you have plenty of clutter, because again, security is the most important thing from your snake's perspective. From your perspective, you got to give them food and water and stuff like that, but they really don't care about that. They just want to feel secure. And if you're in a big enclosure, that's cool, that totally works, but just make sure there's tons of clutter. If you're using a tub, your only option, I believe, is top opening. If you're using glass, you've got a tank, like a fish tank type thing, or you've got a front opening. If you're trying to make the decision between the two, you don't already have your thing, I'd go with front opening. And one of the reasons is that a ball python, one of its many predators in the wild, comes from the sky. And that's why when you go to lift up your ball python like this with your hand right over their head, a lot of times they'll flinch because they are born with some DNA that tells them that things that come out of the sky are going to murder them. So what I do, I have her in a tub and I lift her lid off and I put my hand into the tub somewhere where she's not, and then I bring it forward either in front of or behind her. I can bring it in front of her, but a lot of snakes you want to go behind if they're real flighty. But definitely for any of them, try not to go from over the top. That's why I like a front entrance glass tank, because I can open the doors and go in that way. Now you need heat. Heat is going to come from an under tank heating source. It might come from a ceramic heat emitter. It could potentially come from a heat lamp, although I don't recommend that because if it's a heat lamp, you're going to be using a glass enclosure and you're going to have problems with humidity already. And a heat light or a heat lamp just sucks the humidity out. A CHE does too, a ceramic heat emitter does too a little bit, but less so than a light. And also lights, sometimes they're too powerful and your snake may not like it. I have really bright lights in that enclosure for my other snake. And he does fine with that, but they're not heat lamps, they're plant grow lights. In general, you're gonna have a heat mat that you'll put, I'm not gonna go over. You can look at my other video about how to set up a tub to talk about how that works, but your heat mat is gonna go under your tub or your tank, and it's going to connect to a thermostat. It has to. Don't do it without a thermostat because that could get really hot and burn your snake. And you want to be at 90% on the warm side. Your snake needs to be able to thermoregulate. So they're going to move to where they're going to be the most comfortable because their body can't produce its own heat. So they're going to move to the heat when it's cold, and they're going to move to the cold when they're too hot. Your cold side needs to be around 80. Your warm side around 90. And you're going to have people say, 92, they might say 88. On the cold side, they might say 76. They might say 82, whatever. Somewhere between 80 on the cold, 90 on the warm is really good. Humidity. This is one where you're going to get a wide range of opinions on humidity. My guess is that the standard you're going to hear is around 60%. Some people say between 50 and 60. Science tells us that ball pythons live in really humid environments in Africa. They're oftentimes in termite mounds. Not always in termite mounds, but a lot of times in termite mounds, which are really humid down there. So they can actually stand more humid environments, 85, 90%. I wouldn't do that. That's probably an exaggeration. I wouldn't keep them at 85 or 90% unless they're maybe in shed and you want to bump the humidity to that. I keep mine around 65 to 75%. You'll hear a lot of people say that if your humidity is too high, that'll cause respiratory infection. I don't necessarily believe that. I don't think that you have a lot of snakes in the wild that are running around with respiratory infections because they're in a 90% humidity burrow. What causes respiratory infections oftentimes is lack of cleaning of your enclosure. So they're sitting there in high humidity with poop everywhere. That causes respiratory infection. Also just getting it from other snakes. But I don't think it's a higher humidity. So anyway, and then you've got people like Brian Gundy who has some great advice, by the way. Look him up on YouTube. He has several videos. He's a long-time keeper breeder, really knows his stuff. And what he says is that he doesn't even know what his humidity is. He doesn't monitor it. He hasn't checked it in years. Doesn't even think it's an issue, which is fine. He knows a lot more than I do. I would say this though, he lives in Northern California, and my guess is that his snake room is probably around 50% humidity all the time. He probably just doesn't have humidity problems, so he doesn't need to worry about it. Just use a digital thermometer. This is another thing that a pet store will send you home with, these analog little dial things that you're supposed to stick adhesively to the tank. First of all, they don't work. They're not accurate. And also you don't want any adhesives in your tank because your snake will get stuck on them and it's a problem. So just have a little, this is the one that's actually in Molly Malone's tub. I just set it in there. It's not even mounted on anything. You can actually see the one in that. Can I point to it? There we go. There's one on that side and another on that side of the bioactive enclosure that is mounted on the side, and I used silicone to mount that on there. So still no adhesives. So use a thermometer, hygrometer. That's how you're gonna know what your temps are at all times in there. Also, don't use, I hear sometimes online people are picking up foggers. They're paying like $100 for a fogger to use. This is not a species to use a fogger with. That's more for really tropical species. You shouldn't need a fogger. You should be able to, with your substrate, some moisture in your substrate, and with either covering the top or poking holes in your tubs, be able to manage your humidity. You shouldn't need a fogger, and that's probably going to do more bad than good. So let's talk about substrate since I just mentioned it. Your substrate, you've got a few options. You've got cocoa husk, which I think is really good. And this is going to be really up to you where you live and what your humidity levels are. Cocoa husk is really good, really popular. Bioactive substrate, really good, really popular. Let's see, what do other people use? Cypress mulch and aspen. I've personally never used those. Cypress mulch I hear is really good. Aspen, apparently snakes potentially have problems with impaction, and I've also heard that sometimes the bags of that stuff come with mites or little bugs or whatever. I don't personally know. I haven't had experience with it. I have no reason to buy cypress mulch or aspen because cocoa husk is good, and paper is also good. I have a few snakes right now that are just on paper. That can be either newspaper print. I get the unprinted kind, and or just paper towels is fine. Especially if you're just starting a snake off for the first 30 days, you want them on paper towels or newsprint before substrate. But those substrates are what holds your humidity if you need humidity held. In my place, it's a little bit too humid in here sometimes. So it works well, my bioactive substrate works well in that bioactive enclosure. But in my tubs, sometimes I have more humidity than I want when I use cocoa husk. So I've got to be careful to make sure that it's dry, and if any water spills or whatever, that's going to make it real humid in the tub. So it just depends on where you're at, and you're going to have to maybe just experiment a little bit. Start them off on paper. It's the cheapest, and just see how that works. I almost forgot. Here's a couple things not to use. Don't use sand as a substrate. Don't use pine or cedar as a substrate. Those are really bad for ball pythons. Sand being that it'll get stuck in their heat pits, that you're going to just end up in the vet. And what was the other one? I wrote it down. Repticarpet. Don't use repticarpet. That's bad news also. The other ones, though, are just fine. Next thing you're going to need is hides and clutter. I'm just going to touch on this because I talked about it in my last how to set up a tub video. You want two hides that are exactly the same. And the reason is that these guys, again, will choose security over anything, and that means over temperature. So if I have a hide in there that she likes the shape of better than her other hide, she'll always use the one that she enjoys the shape of because she feels more secure in it. She doesn't care if she's too cold or too hot. She's secure, and that's what'll make her happy. So if you have two that are exactly the same, those are the only two that she has the option of using, and she will then thermoregulate and keep her body at a temperature that it needs to be at. Right, Molly Malone? Oh my God, you guys, she's so cute. Look at her. Look at how cute she is. Look at her face. Oh man, look at that tongue. I wish she would yawn right now. You guys, how cute is it when your ball pythons yawn, right? Okay, let's move on. We already talked about clutter. We mentioned that. So let's go on to feeding these guys. This, again, could be its own video, but I'll just give you the general basic rules. When they're a baby, like this, feed them preferably, I'm going to say preferably a frozen thawed rat. This is up to you. We'll talk about it for a second. Preferably a frozen thawed rat that is 10 to 15% of their body weight. That's how you know what size to feed them. Once she gets to, say, 750 grams-ish, then I'll start doing, rather than 10 to 15% of her body weight, I'll go with the size of the rat needs to be about the same size as the widest part of her body, or maybe a little bit bigger than the widest part of her body. I'm saying 750 grams. Maybe it's 500 grams. I don't know. I just kind of eyeball it. There comes a point where you're going to stop weighing every rat, and you're just going to go by the thickness. I mean, you're going to find that a rat that weighs 10 to 15% of her body weight is going to be about the size of the thickest part of her body anyway. The reason I said frozen thawed is, and there's a bunch of information on this, live. A lot of people love to feed live. I don't, just because I don't think it's a good way for the rodent to go. I like rodents. I think they're cool. Rats and mice are really cool. And I would prefer that they are humanely euthanized rather than attacked by a snake. For one thing. For the other, they can bite back. And a lot of people that feed live end up with snakes with damaged heads and all kinds of stuff because the rodent, rightfully so, fought back. So try to feed frozen thawed if you can. I have switched all my snakes to frozen thawed. It took her 3 meals before she switched. By the way, I got her from Garrick DeMeyer at Royal Constrictor Designs. He is a fantastic breeder. He breeds thousands of snakes. And the toughest part about dealing with Garrick is that he won't sell any of his snakes. He holds everything back. You've got to call him and go, dude, please sell me a snake. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but he holds back so many, but he's got a huge facility and is a really great breeder. Anyway, he starts them out on mice, live mice, which is the easiest thing to start a hatchling out on. And I wanted her on frozen thawed rats. So it took 3 feedings before she went from mice to rats, and then from live to frozen thawed, which made me very happy. It didn't take long at all. We could do a whole other video on this, and we might, but the key with this, with frozen thawed, is just warm it up slowly. Either just have it out for a few hours, put it in your fridge overnight, warm it up in warm water, don't use a microwave, and make sure that at least the head of the animal is considerably warmer when you offer it to your snake. I use a hairdryer, so I warm mine up oftentimes in water so the whole body is warm. I put it in a plastic bag because I don't like them wet, but plastic bag in warm water. Then I pull it out of that plastic bag. The whole body is fairly warm, but then I heat with a hairdryer. I heat the head up to around 100 degrees, or even a little bit hotter than 100 degrees. And then I offer it, and that works every time. Water. Give them water. Change it regularly. I change my water every 2 days. That concludes the section on water. Handling. This has been a question that's commonly asked on the Facebook groups, and especially lately, there's been a lot of people with new ball pythons wondering about what they should do, how they should handle them. The general rule is if you have a new ball python, especially a baby, bring it home, put it in its enclosure for a week. Don't do anything except change the water. Don't try to feed it. Don't try to handle it. Don't be lifting the hide up constantly. Just let them chill. Let them get used to their enclosure. You know, sometimes if it's a little bit of a bigger snake, an adult that's pretty confident, they may not need a week. You still want to give them a couple days, you know, but the general rule is a week. Just wait a week. And then you can start handling. And I would say, so if it's Molly Malone, I started handling her after a week, and then I handled her pretty much every day. And I do, because she always was just like this. She just is happy and, you know, whatever. But if she was a real nervous snake, I would still try to handle her every day, but I would keep it to 10 to 15 minute sessions just to get her used to me. And I just don't want her out all the time because it's obviously stressful for her. So you'll get to know your snakes and you'll figure out whether it's stressful for them to be out or not. Now, if it is stressful for them to be out, that doesn't mean don't handle them. That means you still should handle them to get them used to being handled and make it so it's not as stressful, but just be aware that that's stressing them out. So don't just have them out all the time, is my point. It's kind of like you kind of have to gauge your own snake. But in general, wait that first week. Don't try to feed them until they've had about a week to establish, and then try and give them a meal. If they don't take it, that's okay. Wait another week. Still don't touch them. I would say don't take them out if they haven't eaten for you yet. It is not time to take them out. Now, speaking of that, here's when you are not supposed to handle your ball python. 2 to 3 days after they've eaten, because it takes them a long time to digest. These systems are really slow, and they've just eaten a massive meal, and it's stressful for them to be handled right after they've eaten, and you risk them regurgitating. And regurgitation is a big problem. It's not a big deal. Like if you or I throw up, not a big deal. Oh man, I threw up. That's unfortunate. But these guys their stomach acid is so acidic because it's got to digest bone and fur and all that stuff. Really acidic acid that's coming up the other direction if they regurgitate, and it causes sores all up their throat and all in their mouth that need about 2 weeks to heal if that happens. So that's why regurgitation is such a bad thing. You want to do anything at all costs to not have them regurgitate. And that means for 48 to 72 hours after they've eaten, don't handle them. Also, don't handle them if they're in shed, because it's real stressful for them. They can't see very well. They feel vulnerable. They just don't feel very good. Just if they're in blue, if they're about to shed, just leave them alone. Okay, folks, that's it. I think we covered almost all of what I wanted to say. There's so much more to care of ball pythons, but this should get you started. Kent, do you have any questions?
How long do they live?
That's actually a fantastic question, because people need to be prepared if they're buying a ball python that they are in for a 25 to 30 plus year commitment. Thanks for asking a good, serious question.
Yeah, my next question is just a comment. I noticed Molly Malone licking your hand a lot.
Tongue flicking, yeah.
Yeah, well, now she has the taste of human flesh. So, good luck with that.
Folks, thanks for joining me here in the green room. I hope that you learned something, or at least enjoyed this, or thought that Molly was a beautiful snake. If either of those things apply to you, please hit the like button. The subscribe button would be great. This is a brand new channel for me, so it's really helpful to get views and likes and subscribes and comments. Thanks again for joining me, and I will see you next week.